Hello, my name is Mr. Chipman, and this is 4.5 Global Wind Patterns, AP Environmental Science. I normally teach AP Biology, Murray High School in Murray, Kentucky, but here we are learning AP Environmental. Great stuff, loving this Earth science stuff, it's fantastic. Let's look at the idea of solar radiation and wind. You've probably heard your whole life that it is the energy from the sun that causes the wind to blow. That's good. Unequal heating of the earth. So you have some places that are warmer than others. It's going to cause a sort of gradient of energy, and that gradient causes the earth or the wind to move, the air to move at varying rates, right? The most intense solar radiation strikes the equator, and warm air is going to rise from the equator. It's going to create low pressure, and cold air is more dense, and it sinks and it creates high pressure zones. These are all probably things that you've heard from your weatherman over the years. Do people really watch the weather anymore, though? Maybe not. That's a whole other question. And as that air is moving from warm to cold zones, it creates wind, and that wind is known as the Coriolis effect. And the Coriolis effect is the wind being affected by the rotation of the Earth in the northern hemisphere. Wind tends to deflect to the right, and in the southern hemisphere, it tends to deflect to the left. Let's look at that idea. So these are the major wind belts. You have the Hadley cells. Yeah, we can talk about the Hadley cells. Actually, let's just use this picture. It's better. The Hadley cells from 0 to 30, warm air rises at the equator, and it sinks at around 30 degrees north and south. These winds are called the trade winds. They're called the trade winds because a lot of time trade between Europe and North America use the trade winds, right, to get from Europe to North America or even South America as well. Next, you have the Ferrel cells. These are from 30 to 60, both north and south. These are these kind of mid-latitude circulations. You can see what the wind is doing. It's rising there and going down at around 60 north and south. And these are called the westerlies. The wind patterns here are called the westerlies. And then you have the polar cells at 60 to 90 in both the north and south. Cold, dense air starts to sink there around the poles, which makes sense, flows outward. These are called the polar easterlies. That's what these winds are called, the polar easterlies. And it happens in both areas. Then you have the intertropical convergence zone there at the equator. And this is the region at the equator where the trade winds meet. It's characterized typically by lots of rainfall, lots of thunderstorms, because the warm air rises, gets rid of its moisture, and all of that sort of thing. And so these wind patterns and these warm and cold air patterns affect our weather quite a bit, right? They affect the amount of, they affect where you see precipitation on Earth. You see precipitation near the equator quite a bit because that warm air rises, lets go of all of its moisture, right? Precipitates down to Earth, and you have rainforests near the equator. Well, as the cold air then dumps, you're still close to the equator, so you have lots of sun, but you have really dry air. So you have deserts, right? Lots of sun, lots of not rain, or lots of dry, right? And so you have deserts near the tropics is what those are typically called, and you see it on the map, the yellow lines. Definitely see that in the northern hemisphere more so, where the Sahara and the Arabian Desert, but you also see that in the southern hemisphere, right? You see that in South Africa, you see that in South America, Chile, Argentina, and you see that in Australia as well. So very, very common. And then on the other side of the deserts, you have warm air rising again, and that's where you have the temperate zones. Temperate zones have a lot more precipitation, but have less temperature, right? So that's why they're called temperate zones. You have cold winters, warm summers, typically in the temperate zones that you see on the other side of the equator, typically in the northern hemisphere, because in the southern hemisphere there's not a lot of that, right? There's not a lot of land. You see that in Russia, Canada, North America, And you see the deserts there in western North America. We're going to talk about that in a later video, why you have that sort of thing going on. So yeah, these wind belts and these air cells definitely affect climate and precipitation, temperature, all of those things. Let's look at some examples. So here's the trade winds that we were talking about earlier. You can see at one, you have the movement of materials and all sorts of different things over the years, good and bad, right? This is, but that's why they got their name from, because these winds would be used to haul things back and forth from Europe, Africa, and North America. And then you have the doldrums. You've probably heard the doldrums. You've probably heard it used in a non-wind capacity, right? Like someone's in the doldrums, they're just not moving because the doldrums don't have any wind. It's used because of the convergence area of those winds. You have weak shifting winds, and so it's unreliable. Typically, a ship can get caught in the doldrums for a number of time, or amount of time. We talked about the Sahara Desert, so I'm going to look at some practice problems here. Diagram of Earth's atmospheric circulation below shows Hadley, Ferrel, and polar cells. Which of the following best explains why deserts are often found around 30? So again, we talked about this. We talked about how there's no moisture left in the air that is being dumped down onto the desert areas around 30. And so you have this cool, dry air, but you still have a lot of sun. So lots of sun, no moisture equals desert. Let's go find that in ABCD. Rising warm air at 30 cools. It's not rising at warm. Sinking air from the Hadley is dry, leading to low humidity, arid climates. We like that one. We like that one. Let's look at CD, though, just to talk about them. Coriolis effect deflects trade winds. Why would we think that? Toward the equator, preventing rainfall. There's no reason to believe that. Westerlies converge with the polar easterlies, which happens at 60, not 30. B is the correct answer. I hope this is helpful. We're going to be looking at 4.6 right around the corner.